Jerry Kirkpatrick here, and this coming weekend, Saturday and Sunday, we're going to be racing VARA, the Vintage Auto Racing Association, at Willow Springs, and we'll be campaigning a open wheel car. What is that?
It's a Super V, Formula Super V.
A Formula Super V. And while we're there, you're going to be seeing 3 individuals that are going to be working on the car. And I thought it might be interesting for you to find out a little bit more about these guys and how they can be involved with anything automotive. So first, we have Steve here. And when did you retire and from what?
I was a policeman for 30 years and I retired in 2003.
In LA?
Yes.
And you were in motors for a long time too?
Yes, I worked motors as a policeman and as a sergeant.
Cool. Also, we've known each other since the 60s, and why don't you tell us how we met and when you worked for me down there?
Well, we met through a fraternal organization, and once we knew each other while I was still in high school, and after I graduated from high school, I became an employee of Jerry's, and he introduced me to welding and metal fabrication, and I pretty much enjoyed that and have not stopped. As a matter of fact, speaking of cars, while I was in high school, a friend of mine and I started a car club. So I've had the bug for quite a while.
And that was in the early 70s then?
That was in the, 66, 7, and 8.
Even before that?
Yes.
All right. And what kind of stuff were we producing at the shop while you were working there?
Okay, the first time I worked for you, you manufactured intake manifolds and exhaust systems, Nerf bars, things for some 356 parts, and that was out in the San Fernando Valley.
Yeah, that was out at North Hollywood. K&D Specialties, building
yes.
all types of exhaust intakes. And I think we started the anti-roll bars over in the other shop,
yes.
in Venice.
Yeah, the next time I worked for him was Jerry's Fabrication, I believe the name of the business was. Mm-hmm. And we made a lot of parts for Webco Incorporated, which was a motorcycles accessories.
Handlebars,
place.
4130 handlebars.
And skid plates.
Skid plates.
You made drop systems.
Jacks.
You dropped the frames on 125 Yamahas.
We did that one, lower in the center on that, and I came up with lengthening the swing arm on the Husker harness
for the desert bikes.
For the desert bikes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, you lowered the down tubes for the motocross bikes and extended the swing arm for the desert bikes.
Yeah. So motorcycle stuff early in the 70s. So this is one of Steve's projects. Why don't you tell us about this?
This will be a 1934 Ford two-door sedan.
I'll show you a picture of that.
And it's got an aftermarket chassis, well, an aftermarket style chassis. It was home built, but all the specs on it are such that it's very similar to the TCI chassis, because I bought the TCI master cylinder brackets and it fit right in here. So this is a Chevrolet Ramjet crate motor, small block. It's 350, and again, it's fuel injected and
all independent front suspension.
Yes, okay.
Stainless.
That's a
rack and pinion,
and it's a manual rack. I did not get a. Later on, you'll see another project I have. It's got a power rack, but again, this car is not going to be very heavy. Oh, and I drive my cars a lot. Part of the car sport for me is driving it, not just owning it. So I drive to a lot of car shows and again, just enjoy that part of it.
So I'm going to show you body that goes on here.
Okay, here's the body for the 34, and I've done just a couple of body mods on this. First of all, the top is chopped. The back pillar is chopped, is lowered 2 inches, and the front pillar is lowered 2.5 inches. A subtle chop, I think. Also, as you remember, much like the Model A's, these had open centers in the roof, so it's been what they call filled. And what was used to fill this was a Rambler station wagon top. That's the second body mod. And third, I had to put a relief in here for the distributor for that Chevy engine. Again, I talked earlier about how the dimensions of the engines were different. Had I used a Ford, I would have had to push the whole firewall back. This is my 1967 Mustang, and it's a coupe. It's not a fastback, which if you were paying attention back in the days, in the 60s, of Trans Am came out, then you know, actually these were the ones that handled better. These were actually the A production, where the fastbacks were the B production. And when I got this, my plans for it were to make it a driver. I wanted to enjoy driving it and take it to car shows and things like that. So I was interested in comfort and certainly handling. And what I did, the modifications I've done on this is, I guess you could say collectively, I built a chassis for what is people refer to as a unibody car. And what I did, I put subframe connectors, as it does not have a chassis, by the way. I put subframe connectors that made the entire car more rigid.
Did you make those?
No, they're aftermarket. They're available. They would be very easy to make, though.
Yeah.
Those are again simple. You have subframe in the front and a subframe in the back.
Well,
it's a matter of just connecting them.
Knowing you, I would think they were.
Okay, I've been known to be frugal, but these weren't all that much money. So, the other thing I did, Mustangs had a characteristic, a handling characteristic of understeering. And which means they're somewhat light in the front, and if you turn the wheel, it didn't turn right away. It would take a while, so that's slow in its steering. Well, Shelby came up with an idea that was pretty cost effective, but still not the best fix. So I put a fully independent front suspension on here. Some call them a Mustang 2 by the design, but it's fully adjustable. And what that does, basically, it keeps the flat spot of the tires on the road when you turn. The stock Mustang did not. As the wheels turned, they also leaned, and so you'd lose quite a bit of traction on the ground. I have the drivetrain is a 302 stroked, and I have a C4 3-speed automatic transmission, and I have an 8-inch Ford rear end with 2, 6, 9 gears. So for you car guys, you'll know that those are pretty tall gears, and I'm getting the best mileage this can give me. And to date, I'm right there at about 20 miles per gallon. Why don't we take a look inside? Okay, as I mentioned before, the engine in here, it's a stroked small block Ford. It started out as 302 cubic inches, and by stroking it, this one is now 331. They also offer a stroker kit that goes 347. Okay, things I've done in here. The most obvious is remove the shock towers. Mustangs, for you Mustang people, the ones that are familiar with Mustangs, there's usually a shock tower on each side that makes it very difficult to work on these engines. Another one of the things the shock towers did is it kept you from putting on other types of brake systems, because if you put a larger power booster on there, you wouldn't have room to get the master cylinder because of the shock tower. So with the shock tower is gone, you've given yourself a lot more options. I have an electronic fuel injection, and this is the Holley Sniper electronic fuel injection kit. It also comes with an ignition system, and the computer then operates not only the fuel injectors, but it gets the timing, your ignition timing involved as well, to get a more efficient running engine. I got this Mustang finished and on the road in 2010. So it's been, I guess this is the 10th year I've had it out and about and taking it to car shows and just enjoying driving it. And it's showing the road chips and things like that. It's becoming, you know, what you would call an old build now, and it needs freshening up. But again, I enjoy driving it. I enjoy going to the car shows with it, and it has not given me a bit of trouble. Continuing our introduction video, the member of our racing team, certainly a close friend of mine, Virgil Dawson. And Virgil is truly the brains behind the bunch of us, the team, in designing and putting things together. He's a true craftsman, not just with metal, but wood. And right now we're standing in his modest machine shop. And he creates some magic in here. And I know he's probably embarrassed with these compliments, and he's pretty shy. He doesn't want to talk about himself, but truly he has built some cars that are just amazing. And included in this have been those flathead V8, Ford V8 engines that he has created, these electronic fuel injection flathead V8s. And Virgil, what are some of the things you do in here in your machine shop to make those fuel injected flatheads?
The lathe and the milling machine come into big play, but first, how I got into being on the pit crew with Steve and Paul is Steve asked me if I wanted to be part of the pit crew, and I said, yeah. I said, but why did you pick me? He said, we wanted somebody to blame the stuff on that didn't work. And I said, well, I can handle that. The flatheads, I've never been afraid to try stuff. In fact, you can look around and you won't find anything that didn't work on the flatheads. I had a bunch of it that didn't work. I counted that as a learning experience. I had a lot of fun building it. I forget a lot of it, but I can go back and refresh my mind on some of it. But I appreciate what Steve said. He's stretching the truth quite a bit. But thank you, Steve. Okay,
some of his history. Virgil has owned hundreds of cars during the period of time he has driven, probably both legally and illegally. But the reason he is so good at fixing things is because he has broken a lot of things. That right pedal, that throttle pedal, has gotten him into a lot of trouble. Well, in that, not that he's received a lot of tickets, but in that he has broken things, and he instead of running out and finding another one, and he figures out how to fix them, and that has basically brought us to where we are today. In my opinion, he can fix anything that can be repaired. So again, not an attempt to embarrass him, although I don't mind if it embarrasses him. It doesn't matter to me. But he is a true craftsman, and he will not tell you that. But having worked with him and seen some of the things he does, I am totally convinced. Now, since the time I have known Virgil, this is his latest and most unique project, a 1930 Ford Model A Roadster, and I went with him to pick this up. His cousin owned it, and it was bone stock and looked nothing like this. But Virgil, please tell us, first of all, generally, what did you keep, and next, what have you done, and how did this get to look like this?
You know, I never thought about it until you mentioned it, but I bought a completely stock Model A, and the only thing I used on it is the body. I didn't use the radiator shell. The radiator shell is a 32 Ford. The frame is a 32 Ford. It's been notched in the back to match the contour of the body.
May I interrupt you just for a second? You say the frame is a 32 Ford. Well, isn't it more accurate to say it's the dimensions of a 32 Ford? Because you did not go out and buy this frame. You bought the components.
I bought 32 frame rails, but had to cut them and had to pinch the front of it, and to get the Model A body to fit the frame rails, the front up down in the footwells, they had to be raised up probably 1.25 inches to drop it down over the frame rails. And if you don't drop the body over the frame rails, you get a gap, and it's not an even gap underneath of it. So I took part of the subframe and I cut 3/4 inch off of it. So all of the body has been channeled and dropped down over the frame a little bit, so that it gets rid of the gap.
Okay, you know, in the hot rod world, we like to hear that rumble coming down the street, and turbo powered engines are kind of unique. So tell us about the exhaust system here that you did. I mean, it's a whole different plumbing challenge, And then what results do we get?
Well, first, the manifolds had to be custom made. I just took a bare block and
By who?
Again, him trying to be modest, but that was an engineering feat in itself.
but I bolted to the bare block. I bolted the turbos to it and built the exhaust manifolds to the turbo where they would fit. And over in this area, there's a computer underneath there. When I started doing the fuel injection, I didn't even know what the abbreviation was, TPS or MAP or ever what. So I bought the computer where I figured it would do what I needed, probably more than what I needed, and sure enough it would. It'd probably run a helicopter off of it, but it's mounted there. There's 4 coils mounted on the firewall inside. The spark plug wires goes backwards into that and it goes over to the 4 coils. The coil, every time the engine comes over, it'll fire the coil. Where a regular engine, it's every other time the coil will fire. But this one, and they call that wasted spark. Down here you can't see it, but the distributor has been gutted. A plate with a cutout in it with a sensor under it. It lets it know when number 1 cylinder is coming up. So the fuel injection is sequential, full sequential injection. For the spark, it's got a crank trigger. I mounted a trigger wheel down on the front pulley with a sensor on it. It picks it up and it gives you your ignition.
Now, the 1930 Ford Model A pickup truck. This is what Virgil had when I met him. I'm thinking 7 or 8 years ago. And learning from this is how I started to understand how talented Virgil is. Again, this was his second fuel-injected V8 flathead effort, and some of the things he's done on here is great. And what I didn't mention before, when we were talking about his Roadster, from the time he picked up the donor Model A Roadster to the time he drove this twin-turboed Roadster was about 10 months. He did that entire build. He built the chassis. I mean, you heard the whole story. He did all of that work in less than a year. Well, again, I did not know Virgil when he built this truck, but he said it took him less than a year. And again, Virgil, tell us some of the things. I know you had the same concerns about hiding things, and I know, well, you didn't have a rumble seat area to hide special things like you did with the turbo, but you didn't have a turbo on this. So please tell us what was unique and fun about this project.
This engine took a little bit more work than the Roadster did because I was in a learning curve on it. But it has the same fuel injection, the same fuel rails as the Roadster. This one has the runners between the ports blocked off, so you're using each butterfly is per cylinder, so you got eight individual ports and for full sequential injection. It's got everything the other one does. It's not as crowded due to the turbos. It does have fresh air intake coming in here. On the computer, data logged without it, and I was running right at almost the same temperature that the water was in the radiator going into the intake manifold, which it should have been cooler. After putting these on there, I'm about 8 or 9 degrees higher on ambient temperature. So those was a big improvement on it.
Now, something interesting, tell me about the gearing you did. I mean, characteristically, Ford V8 flathead likes low RPM. Well, I have personally been present when you have had this truck at 90 miles an hour on the freeway. Now, why did that not go up in smoke?
I've got a T5 5-speed in it. It's got the overdrive.
Manual.
So it brought the RPMs way down on it. Worked out really well.
Something unique you did about a fuel tank. What did you do here?
Can't see it, but in the back, it looks like a trunk mounted in the bed, but it's actually, you can open the top up and there's a fuel tank in it. It goes through the floor of the bed down to the frame. It'll hold 20 gallons of fuel.
Well, we showed you Virgil's beautiful Model A's and all the work he put into it. Stepping away from that a little bit, he got involved with this car, and it made my heart smile when I found out it was a Ford. And Virgil, tell us about this one.
Started at the radiator. I ended up with a new radiator, a new fan assembly, a new engine, a new front runner system. Friend Steve here, he talked me into putting a Mustang 2 type front end under it, got rid of the shock towers, made a floor console for it, new shifter, mounted battery in the trunk, kill switch upholstered the trunk. There's not much on this that hadn't been replaced since I bought it. I bought it for the long trips for comfort. Model A's is fun to drive, but this one is just very nice out on the road. They're quieter and
Oh, it's not warmed up yet. Continuing with the introduction of the video, this is our friend Paul Lice. Okay. 3, 2, yeah. 3, 2, 1. Continuing with the introduction video, this is our friend Paul Lysick, and we've been friends for 10 years, all car related. That's how we got together, met, and he's going to talk to us about some of his car projects. He's been a car guy forever as well. So, Paul Lysick.
Hello there. Yeah, this is one of my older projects I've had. I think I bought this back in '86, and it was actually from a friend of mine's brother that had it when we were in high school. It's a 1966 Shelby GT350. One of the, I think they built about 2,200 of these back in the day in 1966. Like I said, it came from a friend of mine's brother. I remembered they had it when he was in high school, and that was many years before, so I called them up and they still had it and was able to obtain it from them. It wasn't in this condition. What it was in was stored in a garage for the last 25 years because the engine was bad in it and they just stopped driving it as many people did back in the day. And now I've taken the time, I'm just about finished with it, converting this car back to a street car, and some people may not like what I've done, but that's their opinion, and my opinion's different because I've made it creature comforts. It has electric power steering in it now. It will have air conditioning, a 5-speed gearbox, just to make it more fun on the road.
What's the motor?
Motor is an original 289 hypo. And when Shelby was done with those, they put out 307 horsepower, approximately. That's what was advertised. It is a stock, just 289 hypo, nothing really else done to it. But the car, as you can see, it's getting there. It does need.
Is that a Tremec 5-speed?
Yes.
Microphone's under there.
What's that?
The microphone is under there.
Oh, okay. You got some editing to do.
So whatever you said with the hood down,
Yeah.
we're not gonna get much
We're not
of
going to
that.
use any of that, so that's
Yeah,
fine.
okay.
Yeah.
So you can either start over now.
Okay. As, this is being converted back into a street car. As I mentioned earlier, that I am doing some other open wheel racing with Vara, and you'll see that in a video we'll put out this weekend because we have a race at Willow Springs International Raceway. And one other thing, since we have it here, we're going to shoot a little video of a Lemons truck that we're racing in 24 Hours of Le Mans as a pun on the Le Mans race in France, and we'll show you that shortly. Well, hello again. We have what we've built here is you might think it's an 86 Ford Ranger, and it kind of is. Underneath it is a 2010 Ranger that was damaged heavily in the front, and we stripped it down to the frame, and underneath this truck is the 2010 Ranger. When we channeled this, which it was Jerry, and Steve, and then there's also, you'll meet Virgil later, were all the chief culprits in this monstrosity, which is extremely fun to drive and came out very, very well and is very competitive in Lemons racing. The truck was channeled 4 inches and lowered another 4 inches. So it's quite low to the ground. Right now you can't see that because we have the tires off. We're getting ready for prepping it for the next event. But as you can see, one of the problems we ran into is the front hood. That's as far as it closes for the most part, because when we channeled it, the taller motor in the 2010 doesn't fit under the hood anymore. We ran into also problems inside the cab because the cab's 4 inches lower and clearance for the driver got a little bit tight. We went through and Virgil had designed front adjustable A-arms for the front. To lower it, we just cut the springs. It's maybe not the proper way to do it, but it worked. In the rear, Virgil also designed a adjustable clamping for the rear leaf springs that have helped the stability and ride and tightening the suspension to where we need it. And then, for the racing, you have to have a full 6-point, I think this is an 8-point cage in this vehicle. I can't remember if they require 6 or 8, but we put the full 8 in there. You will see this on the track in a future video coming out soon, and I want to thank you guys for your time. I don't know what else you want.